I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I just bought my first house. It's definitely no suburban dream, more like a rundown mess that, according to the real estate agent, had potential. The place has character for sure, which basically means it's old, creaky, and in desperate need of a lot of work. But honestly, I'm excited. I see this place as my project, a blank canvas I can make entirely my own. I've done a bit of DIY before, helping friends here and there, but this is a whole different ballgame. The house is old enough that I'm pretty sure it's seen a few decades of questionable decor choices. The walls are covered in peeling wallpaper that might have been trendy back in the 70s. The kitchen? Picture avocado green cabinets, chipped tiles, and a countertop that looks like it's been through a battle. And let's not even get started on the bathroom. Let's just say I'd rather not touch anything in there without gloves. But I have a plan. A tight budget too, so I've mapped out each phase of what needs to be done. First, I'm tackling the kitchen and living room, just a bit of demo work and some painting to start. I want a cozy, modern rustic look, something warm and inviting but with clean lines. My goal is to do as much as I can on my own, both to save money and because honestly it feels good to learn as I go and make it truly mine. As soon as my family found out, they were thrilled. My mom and sister have been calling non-stop since I closed on the house, throwing ideas my way. Mom thinks I should brighten it up with floral wallpaper in the living room. My sister suggested a dark wood paneling for the hallway. Dark wood paneling? I'd rather rip it all out and let the place breathe a little. It's almost funny how their vision is the complete opposite of what I want. Even before I had a chance to unpack, my mom was all over me about getting a proper kitchen layout. She and my sister kept sending photos of paint swatches, ideas for lighting fixtures, and better options for the flooring I hadn't even chosen yet. I mean, I get it, they're just trying to help. But every time I open a message from them, it feels less like advice and more like they're subtly hinting that I don't know what I'm doing. And it's not like they've been shy about just popping in unannounced either. One afternoon, I came back from a trip to the hardware store and found Mom already in the house, sitting on the floor with a bunch of fabric swatches spread around her. She'd brought wallpaper samples too. Apparently, she thought she'd get a head start on livening up the space with a few options she liked. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. I hadn't even picked a color scheme yet. She held up this floral wallpaper, pinks and greens and all, and asked what I thought. I managed a polite, not exactly what I had in mind, hoping she'd get the hint. This kind of thing kept happening. Every time I'd talk to them, it was like another design debate. They'd say they wanted to help, but it was clear that they had a vision, and my vision wasn't exactly part of it. I tried to gently remind them that this was my space, and that I wanted to handle the design choices myself. But they'd nod, maybe agree, then jump right back into discussing things like light fixtures and countertop materials. It was like talking to a wall, a very opinionated, well-meaning wall. The first real warning sign was when I discovered that my sister had taken it upon herself to snap a few photos of the house and send them to our family's group chat, without asking me. I opened my phone to find a flood of messages, most of them from relatives who live hours away, sharing their 2 cents about what I should do with the place. I was getting opinions from people I hadn't seen since last Christmas. One cousin even suggested knocking down a wall to open it up. I mean, that wall was practically holding up the house. It was clear that if I didn't start setting some serious boundaries, I'd never have control over this project. Part of me felt a little bad. After all, they're just excited and trying to be involved. But every helpful suggestion was starting to feel like an intrusion. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my chance to finally do things my way, and instead it felt like everyone else was claiming a piece of it. So I made a decision. No more group chat updates, no more open invitations for design input. I'd share the final result when it was all done. That's it. This house was going to be my project, not a family committee decision. I figured if I stuck to my guns, maybe I could get them to back off and let me make my own mistakes, or hopefully not make too many at all. Even though I was gearing up for some family resistance, I felt more determined than ever. I didn't need floral wallpaper or dark wood paneling. I just needed a place that felt like it belonged to me from the walls to the floors. And with any luck, I'd be able to keep my family at a respectful distance long enough to make that happen. Update 1. A couple of days after I made the decision to keep the family out of my project, I woke up to a call from my mom. Before I could even finish saying hello, she launched right in. I got in touch with a contractor. He's coming by today to take a look at the house. I sat up, confused and still half asleep. Wait, what? I asked, not sure if I'd heard her right. She clarified, a little too casually, that she'd found someone to handle some necessary upgrades to the place. Apparently, she'd already talked it over with my sister, who was also on board with the idea. They'd planned it all out, even discussing design plans and getting quotes on the work. Now, this was exactly the kind of thing I wanted to avoid. I hadn't even agreed to this, and here they were, treating my house like a family project. After hanging up, I spent the morning stewing over it. When I called her back, I made it clear I didn't need or want this kind of help. Later that day, I called a family meeting at my house, hoping to clear the air. I started by saying I appreciated their excitement, but that this was my project and that I wanted to handle things on my own. My mom and sister just looked at each other, and then my mom shrugged, saying they were just trying to help me since I clearly needed it. When I pushed back, explaining that I had my own plans and didn't need anyone stepping in, they looked genuinely surprised. My mom actually laughed a little, almost like I was being naive. She said, "You can't do this all alone. It's too big of a job." And my sister nodded along, adding that a professional touch was exactly what this place needed. It felt like they'd made up their minds that I couldn't handle it on my own. Then came the kicker. They offered to chip in financially if I agreed to let them have a say. They framed it as a win-win, like if they covered some of the expenses, I'd get the help I supposedly needed, and they'd get to make some design decisions. I'll admit, it was tempting, considering my tight budget, but I knew what that meant. Accepting their money would mean giving up control of the project. I told them, thanks, but no thanks. I wasn't willing to trade my independence for their contributions. My mom's smile faded, and my sister gave me a look like I was being impossible. They didn't say much after that, and when they left, it was with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The whole meeting had done nothing but make me feel like I was fighting for my own home. That evening, I got a text from an old friend who'd heard about the house. He was someone I used to work with on a few small reno projects, and he offered to help out, no strings attached. It felt like the lifeline I needed. I thanked him, and we agreed to get started that weekend. With a fresh dose of motivation, I jumped into the work. We started with the demo in the kitchen, ripping down the ugly avocado green cabinets and prying up the cracked, ancient tile. The sense of freedom was amazing. I felt like I was taking the first real steps toward making this house my own. We made serious progress, too, enough that I was already picturing the new cabinets and countertops I'd chosen, all without any helpful suggestions from my family. But of course, that peace didn't last long. Just a few days later, my mom and sister decided to drop by unannounced. I was covered in dust, standing in the middle of what used to be the kitchen, surrounded by torn-out cabinets and debris. They looked around, stunned. My mom's eyes went wide, and my sister had her hand over her mouth. It was clear they hadn't expected things to look unfinished. After a few seconds of silence, my mom finally spoke up. She said something about how I was being reckless, and that tearing things down without a plan was asking for trouble. My sister chimed in, calling the whole thing a mess. I could see where this was headed. They thought I'd bitten off more than I could chew, and they weren't shy about saying so. We ended up in a heated argument. They accused me of being ungrateful and not listening to the help they'd offered. I shot back, telling them that I didn't need anyone making decisions for me or treating me like I didn't know what I was doing. The back and forth got pretty intense, with my mom insisting that she only wanted what was best for me and my sister telling me I was acting too stubborn. When they finally left, I was left with a mix of relief and frustration. I realized then that if I wanted to keep any peace, I'd have to stop sharing updates with them entirely. No more calls about what stage I was at or letting them see any progress until I was done. It was my project, and I needed to protect that. For the next few days, I worked in silence. But the family drama started to creep in, even when they weren't there. Every time I picked up a tool or planned out the next step, I felt a pang of worry that they'd show up or that I'd have to deal with another round of unsolicited advice. But I pushed forward, determined to stick to my vision and make this house mine, my way. By the end of that week, I was exhausted but more determined than ever. I'd managed to push past the noise and keep things moving. The walls were down, the old cabinets were out, and the house was slowly starting to take shape. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, especially with the family's eyes on everything I did, but I was ready to keep pushing. This was my space, and no amount of meddling was going to change that. Update 2. The unannounced visits started not long after our argument. I'd be in the middle of tearing down a wall or sanding down cabinets, and suddenly there was my mom, or sometimes my sister, popping in just to check in. They'd do a quick walk around, eyes scanning every inch, and then launch into critiques about the dust, the debris, or the supposed lack of progress. At first, I tried to shrug it off. They were just concerned, right? But the visits kept happening. And each time, it was the same routine. My sister would raise an eyebrow at the piles of broken drywall I'd carefully stacked up in the corner, or my mom would frown at the new paint samples I'd taped to the walls. "Are you sure about these colors?" she'd ask, tapping a pastel blue sample like it was a crime. It's very different. One day, I came home from a quick trip to pick up supplies, and something felt off as soon as I stepped inside. The living room was different, brighter somehow. Then I saw them. New curtains. My mom had taken it upon herself to install flowery curtains on the windows, something out of a quaint 80s country house. Pink and floral, clashing completely with the vibe I was going for. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the curtains, rods and all, and took them down. They didn't last an hour. I sent her a quick text, letting her know that I appreciated the thought, but that I'd be choosing my own decor. Within minutes, I got a response. "We just thought it would add some color, but if that's how you feel." She left it at that, but I could almost hear the disappointment. The next thing I knew, my sister started showing up with friends. They'd wander around, pointing and commenting like they were on some home renovation tour. I found out that she'd been telling her friends about my cool project, apparently inviting them to see the before of the transformation. It was like having an audience for every decision, every nail hammered into the wall. Privacy was slowly becoming a distant memory. After the third tour of the week, I decided enough was enough. I pulled my sister aside and told her I'd appreciate it if she stopped bringing people over without checking with me first. She didn't look happy about it, but I was firm. That seemed to put an end to the parade of visitors, at least for a while. But then came the family group chat. Suddenly, my mom and sister were posting messages about how they were only trying to help, calling me ungrateful for not accepting their advice. They even threw in a few comments about how hard they'd been trying to support me, and it wasn't fair that I kept pushing them away. Relatives chimed in, some of them agreeing, others throwing in their own opinions. It was like my family's version of a live-streamed intervention. That night, a friend who'd been through his own family drama called me up. I vented about the constant visits, the group chat chaos, and everything in between. He listened, then suggested something simple, a security camera. He said it would at least give me a heads up when they were on their way and give me some peace of mind. The idea stuck. The next morning, I went out and bought a small security camera. I installed it above the front door, aimed right at the driveway. Nothing fancy, just enough to alert me if anyone was coming by unannounced again. With that small piece of privacy back, I threw myself back into the work. The kitchen was coming along, and I'd finally chosen a color for the walls, something soft and neutral, a light gray that brightened the space without feeling too harsh. I installed new flooring, simple but sturdy, and found myself getting excited about each new change. The house was starting to look like the vision I'd had in my head since day one. A few days later, I got an email from my mom with links to better options for the kitchen backsplash, the countertops, even the cabinet hardware. No message, just a string of links and some photos of sleek, shiny designs that were nothing like what I wanted. I didn't reply. I figured the silence would get the message across. Not long after, my cousin reached out. She'd heard about the family drama and laughed, telling me she'd gone through something similar when she bought her place. She offered her own brand of support, jokes, some tips on how to keep relatives at bay, and a promise not to come over without an invitation. It was refreshing, to say the least. From then on, I decided I'd keep the updates private. I let my friends in on the progress now and then, but family was off the list. I was done with the unsolicited advice, and having a break from their opinions was exactly what I needed. As the walls took on their new color and the floors started coming together, I felt like the space was finally mine. For the first time in a while, I felt in control. I didn't have to explain every choice, justify every change, or brace myself for the next wave of family input. And as each room transformed, I knew I was getting closer to a place that felt like home, my home, no one else's. Update 3. It started with a message from my mom. She told me she and my sister were feeling hurt and left out, like I was shutting them out of my life by keeping them away from the house. She mentioned that they wanted to be more involved and reminded me of their generous offer to help cover some of the costs if I'd let them have a say in the design choices. I knew what she was doing. It was a classic guilt trip, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me second-guess things for a moment. I mean, turning down extra money when the budget was tight wasn't exactly easy, but I also knew what it meant. Accepting their help would mean handing over control, and there was no way I was going to let this turn into their project. I responded, saying thanks but no thanks. This was my house, and I wanted it to stay that way. The replies came almost immediately, first from my mom and then my sister, both making it clear they thought I was being unreasonable. Why wouldn't you accept such a generous offer? They asked, with that thinly veiled disappointment only family can perfect. My sister added that they only wanted the best for me, that I should appreciate the support. I ended up explaining myself again, telling them that this project was mine, and I didn't want anyone else making decisions about it. I thought that might be the end of it, but they just wouldn't let it go. Every message seemed to carry the same tone, the same mix of disappointment and frustration that I wasn't bending. It was clear they didn't understand, or didn't want to. Meanwhile, I kept working on the house. I took on the bathroom renovation next, which was a huge step for me. Between fixing the plumbing, installing new fixtures, and choosing the tile, it was a challenge, but seeing it come together was satisfying. I had a friend who stopped by to give a few pointers. Someone who'd done a lot of reno work himself, but he never tried to take over. Just showed me a couple of tricks, handed me the wrench, and let me figure things out. And at the end of it, when I finally finished, I was proud. This was my work, my accomplishment. Of course, my family wasn't exactly thrilled. When my mom and sister came by, they did their usual walkthrough, but this time, the vibe was different. They looked around, gave a few nods, and then my sister muttered something about how they would have chosen nicer tile. My mom just glanced at the sink and mentioned how a marble countertop would have looked better. That was when I knew it was time to draw a line. After they left, I sent them a message. I told them I appreciated their input, but I was serious about this being my project. I made it clear they either respected my space and my choices, or they stayed away. No more surprise visits, no more critiques. This was my home, and I didn't want to feel like a guest in it. The response wasn't what I'd expected. My sister fired back, saying I was isolating myself and pushing everyone away. She said it was like I didn't want to be part of the family anymore. I could feel the drama ramping up. She accused me of being ungrateful, refusing to accept their help, and acting like I knew everything. But I wasn't budging. I'd spent too much time working on this house to let anyone else tell me how it should look. If that meant dealing with their silent treatment, so be it. I had a few friends who checked in, asking how things were going and offering real support. A couple of neighbors even stopped by to admire the work I'd done, asking questions about the renovations, congratulating me on the progress. It felt good to hear some positive feedback from people who didn't expect anything in return. That week, I reached a milestone, the halfway point. It was hard to believe how far I'd come, from those early demo days to finally putting together the space I'd envisioned. I celebrated in my own way, taking a night off, sitting in the newly painted kitchen, and just taking it all in. For the first time, the place felt like a real home, not just a construction site. Then came the silence from my family. After my ultimatum, they went quiet. No texts, no calls, nothing. Part of me felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. I'd finally gotten the distance I wanted, but it came with this lingering tension. The house was quiet, sure, but it wasn't exactly the peace I'd imagined. I decided, though, that I was done trying to please everyone. If they didn't understand, that was on them. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to explain myself or make them feel better about decisions that were ultimately mine to make. With that mindset, I dove back into the work, ready to finish what I'd started. There was still a lot left to do, but every nail I hammered in, every piece of wood I cut, it all felt like a step closer to reclaiming my independence. And no amount of guilt tripping or silent treatment was going to change that. This was my home, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. Update 4. The house was nearly done. I'd spent weeks on the finishing touches, painting the last walls, fixing up the trim, and adding a few personal decor touches. Everything from the color palette to the fixtures felt like my own, and the house finally looked exactly how I'd pictured it. It was a cozy, modern, rustic space, simple, clean, and nothing like the dated, dark interior it used to be. Just as I was wrapping things up, my family reached out. After weeks of silence, my mom sent a message saying they were all curious to see the place and asking if they could visit to check on the progress. I could tell they were itching to see what I'd done, maybe even to throw in their last-minute critiques. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep this space just for myself, but another part of me was ready to let them see it, if only to finally put the whole thing to rest. I decided to invite them over but set some clear ground rules, no unsolicited advice, no extra helpful ideas. This was a visit, not another chance for them to take over. I sent the text, and they agreed, though the replies were short, like they weren't entirely thrilled with the conditions. On the day of the visit, I made sure everything was in place. I'd put so much work into every corner of the house, and it was strange to see it all come together after months of chaos. The walls were painted in soft tones, the floors gleamed, and even the little details, like the fixtures and lighting, were exactly how I wanted. The place looked like it belonged to me, not anyone else, and that alone made all the effort worth it. When they arrived, I could see the shock in their faces. They stood in the entryway, looking around in silence, taking in the transformation. The walls they'd seen half torn down were now clean and painted, the floors were replaced with new wood planks, and the kitchen, which they once insisted needed a professional touch, was completely redone with simple cabinets and a functional layout that I'd planned myself. For a moment, no one said anything. My mom's eyes traveled from the living room to the kitchen, and my sister seemed almost frozen in place. The silence stretched on, and I half expected them to launch into a list of everything I could have done differently. Then, slowly, they started asking questions. My mom asked how I'd managed to fix the kitchen cabinets myself, and my sister wanted to know where I'd found the light fixtures. It wasn't exactly a flood of compliments, but there was a hint of curiosity and maybe even a bit of respect. We walked through the house, room by room, and though they were clearly holding back their full opinions, I could tell they were seeing the place in a new light. They stopped making suggestions and just took in the details, the color choices, the simple decor, the small touches that gave the house personality without going overboard. Finally, my mom broke the silence in the kitchen, looking around with a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. She said, "I didn't expect it to look so put together." My sister nodded, grudgingly admitting that the space looked different, but nice. It wasn't exactly a glowing review, but it was something. For the first time, they seemed to recognize that this was my project and that I'd done it my way. There was a moment of awkwardness, like they weren't sure how to react to the fact that I'd pulled it off without their help. My mom even mentioned how she couldn't believe I'd done it all myself, and it was the closest thing to approval I'd gotten from her in a long time. As we stood there, the tension that had been building up over the months seemed to finally ease, just a little. It was bittersweet. I felt a wave of relief that they were seeing my work, but it also hit me that it had taken this long for them to step back and let me have my own space. It was strange knowing that I'd been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Before they left, there were a few small comments. My sister mentioned that the living room could use a bit more color, and my mom still suggested a different countertop option for the kitchen, but I shrugged it off, too tired to engage and honestly, not really bothered anymore. I knew this house was exactly what I wanted, and I didn't need anyone else's approval. As they drove off, I stood in the doorway, feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. The house was done, and it was mine. I'd fought for every choice, every detail, and now it was finally a space that reflected who I was, not who anyone else thought I should be. Looking back on the journey, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I'd learned a lot, not just about home renovation, but about standing my ground, about setting boundaries, and about knowing when to let go. This house was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of the independence I'd fought to keep. From here on out, I knew one thing for sure. This was my home, and I wouldn't let anyone take control of my choices again. It was a new chapter, one that I was ready to embrace without any interference. For the first time, I could look around and know that this space was completely, undeniably mine. Update 5. The renovations were finally complete, and I moved into my newly transformed house. It was surreal stepping into each room, knowing every wall color, fixture, and piece of furniture had been chosen by me for me. I walked from room to room, just taking it all in like I was seeing it for the first time. That first night alone, I didn't even want to turn on the TV. I just sat in the living room, the soft glow from the new light fixture casting a warm, calm light over everything. It was the quietest I'd heard this house since the demo started months ago. I stayed up looking around, catching small details I'd missed before. A perfect corner on the bookshelf, the smooth grain of the new wood floor. It was strange, but comforting, to feel the house was truly mine now. The next morning, I got a text from my mom. She asked if she and my sister could visit sometime soon, curious to see how everything had turned out. I hesitated, picturing the quiet, personal space I'd created suddenly filled with their comments and suggestions again. I replied politely, letting them know that I'd like a bit more time to settle in before having guests. My mom sounded disappointed, but she didn't push, which was a relief. The following days were peaceful. I spent time rearranging a few things, moving a lamp from one corner to another, adjusting a painting on the wall. It felt good to have the freedom to make these small changes without anyone looking over my shoulder. I found myself making the house more comfortable with each passing day, tweaking things on my own terms. Friends came over to see the finished place, and their reactions were refreshing. They weren't offering suggestions or critiques, just genuine appreciation. Some of them remembered what the house looked like when I first got it, so their surprise at the transformation was sincere. Hearing things like this is so you, and it feels cozy and welcoming from people who knew me was exactly what I'd hoped for. One friend even brought a small plant as a housewarming gift, saying it matched the vibe. As more people came through, I realized that this place wasn't just a project, it was a symbol of my independence, something I'd fought hard to keep. I had proof that I could create something entirely on my own, without any strings attached. A couple of neighbors who'd watched me lug materials in and out stopped by, congratulating me on finishing the renovations. They were warm, genuinely impressed, and a few even told me they'd been rooting for me every time they saw me working on the place. That sense of acceptance in the community felt good, almost like I was finally part of the neighborhood. Then one evening, I found myself reflecting on the family drama that had unfolded. Despite how frustrating it had been to have them constantly interfering, I realized that maybe their intentions weren't as bad as they'd seemed. Sure, their idea of helping had been overbearing, but they had been excited. I'd kept thinking about it as criticism when, maybe, it had just been a different version of support. Feeling a bit more settled, I decided to send a message to my mom. I thanked her and my sister for their interest in the project, but also emphasized that the boundaries I'd set were still important to me. I explained that this was a huge personal accomplishment for me, and I wanted to enjoy it in my own way. The next day, I got a reply that surprised me. My mom admitted they may have overstepped out of excitement and a desire to be involved. She actually apologized, saying she hadn't realized how much pressure they'd put on me. It was unexpected, but her honesty was a relief. It felt like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying was suddenly gone. A few weeks later, I decided to invite them over for a casual gathering, nothing fancy. I made it clear it was just to share the space, not to critique or give feedback. I wasn't sure how they'd respond, but they agreed, and this time they didn't try to slip in any helpful ideas beforehand. When they arrived, I could see a new expression on their faces, genuine curiosity, without the undertones of judgment I'd gotten so used to. My mom asked questions, my sister marveled at the details, and there were no subtle comments about what could have been done differently. They walked through the house with me, asking about my favorite parts, and it felt like we were finally on the same page. By the end of the visit, my mom gave me a hug, telling me she was proud of what I'd done. My sister even joked, saying maybe they should have trusted me from the start. It wasn't a huge moment, but it felt like closure. We'd reached an understanding, and I could tell they finally respected my choices, even if they didn't align with their own ideas. When they left, I felt a deep sense of relief. This chapter, the one filled with tension and boundary setting, was finally coming to a close. I'd proven to myself, and apparently to my family, that I was capable of creating my own space, my own life, without letting anyone else take control. With the house complete, and my boundaries respected, I could finally look forward. This space was truly mine, and I knew I'd carry the lessons I'd learned throughout the whole process into everything I did from here on out. This was the start of a new chapter, one where I felt secure in my choices, my space, and my independence. The house was done, but the journey was just beginning. I-28M worked hard for years to achieve something I thought would make my parents proud. Ever since I got my first job, I saved aggressively, cutting corners where I could, skipping vacations and working overtime. The goal? To give back to my parents for everything they did for me. They sacrificed so much to give me a good life, so when I finally had enough for a down payment, I bought them a house last year. The house is in my name. Not because of any secret plan, but because it made the most financial sense. I had the better credit score, so I got lower interest rates, better mortgage terms, and avoided a ton of unnecessary fees. My parents knew this from the start. We had discussions about it, and they never questioned anything. It wasn't some hidden technicality. I was upfront about everything. I didn't even ask them for rent. They moved in, and I stayed in the guest room. The plan was simple. I'd stay there for a bit while I saved up for my own place. Win-win, they got a home, and I had some extra time before moving out. Everything was fine for the first few months. They were happy, I was happy, and I thought I had done something meaningful. Then small things started changing. At first, it was subtle. They stopped saying thank you when I covered the bills. Then they started setting house rules for me. Eventually, their tone changed entirely, treating me less like their son and more like an intruder. Suddenly, my parents started acting different. At first, it was subtle, avoiding certain topics, getting passive-aggressive about little things. Then they started coming up with weird new house rules for me. They told me I couldn't have friends over without asking for permission. I needed to be home by a certain time, and they wanted me to help out more by doing all the chores, things they never asked of me when we were living in our old place. It was like they didn't see me as their son anymore, but as an unwelcome guest. I brushed it off at first, thinking they just needed time to adjust, but it only got worse. The final straw came when I came home one evening and found all my stuff packed up in boxes. My clothes, my computer, my personal things, everything shoved into the garage like I was some tenant who had overstayed his lease. That's when they sat me down and told me they needed their own space, and that I should start looking for another place to live. No warning, no discussion, just a firm you need to move out. I reminded them the house was in my name. Their response? That's just on paper. We live here now. At first I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. They told me I had 1 week to leave, saying I was an adult and needed to be independent, as if I wasn't already the one financially supporting everything. I was caught between shock and anger. I didn't want to kick my parents out. That was never my intention. But at the same time, I had saved for years to buy this house, and now they were trying to take it from me, like I was some unwanted guest. My siblings got involved as soon as they heard. One stayed neutral, but my other sibling fully sided with my parents, saying I shouldn't ruin the family over a house. Extended relatives started chiming in too, guilt-tripping me for even thinking about standing my ground. I reached out to a lawyer friend, just to see what my actual rights were. Legally, I owned the house. There was no debate there, but my friend warned me that just because I had the legal right, didn't mean this would be easy. My parents could refuse to leave, drag things out, or even make things messy in court. So I tried mediation. I sat down with them and explained my side, hoping we could reach some kind of agreement. Instead, they doubled down. They said they were looking into legal options to keep the house, and that if I tried to steal their home, they would fight me on it. I don't even know how that would work. I bought the house. The mortgage is under my name. The bills are in my name. How do they think they can take it from me? And yet somehow I'm the bad guy in this situation. My phone has been blowing up with messages from relatives telling me I'm being cruel, selfish, and heartless. Some of them genuinely seem to believe my parents' version of events, that I'm some ungrateful son trying to evict them for no reason. I never wanted any of this. I wanted to do something good for them. Instead, I'm being treated like an outsider in my own home. I don't know what to do. I feel like no matter what decision I make, someone is going to hate me for it. Would I be the bad guy if I actually evicted my own parents? After my parents told me I had a week to leave my own house, I couldn't even sleep there that night. I packed a bag and crashed at a friend's place. I didn't want to deal with them. I needed time to think. The next morning, my phone was blowing up. Text after text from relatives, some I barely even talked to, calling me ungrateful. Apparently, my parents had already told their version of the story. According to them, I was suddenly trying to throw them out for no reason. They made it sound like I had promised them the house, like I had just changed my mind overnight. My lawyer friend called to check in. He reminded me that even though the house was legally mine, getting them out wouldn't be as simple as telling them to leave. If they refused, I'd have to go through the formal eviction process, which could take several months if they contested it. He advised me to file as soon as possible to prevent them from dragging it out indefinitely. I asked what my options were. He suggested mediation first, but if they weren't willing to be reasonable, I needed to start thinking about next steps. Then my mom called. I almost ignored it, but I picked up. She was crying, saying she and Dad felt betrayed that I wouldn't just let them have the house. She went on about how they had assumed I bought it as a gift for them. They weren't renters in their minds, they were owners. I reminded her that we had talked about this before. The house was always in my name. They knew that, but none of that mattered anymore. She just kept repeating that they thought it was theirs. I hung up and checked my utility bills. They hadn't paid them in weeks. The water, electricity, internet, everything was still in my name, and they had just stopped paying. I had to cover the overdue amounts myself to avoid shutoffs. That was when it really hit me. They weren't just trying to push me out, they were cutting me off financially from the house while still expecting me to take care of everything. I called my brother, hoping at least he would see reason. Instead, he told me I was overreacting and should just buy another house. He actually suggested that I should let them have this one and move on. Like I had millions lying around to just buy homes whenever someone decided to take one from me. Then a cousin reached out, warning me that my parents were talking to a lawyer, though I had no idea how they were affording one, considering they hadn't paid rent or bills in months. It made me wonder if they had found a lawyer willing to work on contingency, or if they had convinced a family member to help cover their legal fees. That set off alarms. If they found some loophole, they could drag this out even longer. I needed to get ahead of this. I started looking into what it would take to formally evict them. But before I could even do that, I heard another wild claim. A relative told me that my parents were telling everyone they had taken out a mortgage on the house. At first, I thought it was just another lie, but then I started worrying. Had they actually tried to forge my signature? Had they spoken to a fraudulent lender? I immediately contacted my bank to ensure no suspicious activity had been attempted under my name. The mortgage was in my name. There was no way they could have done that. But the fact that they were even saying it meant they were trying to make people believe they had a legitimate claim. That was it. I was done. I posted an update online explaining everything, Thousands of comments poured in, telling me I was right to stand my ground. People shared their own stories of being manipulated by entitled family members. The advice was unanimous: serve the eviction papers. I had been trying to avoid it, hoping they would see reason, but they had made it clear they weren't going anywhere unless I forced them out. So that's what I was going to do. After everything that had happened, the lies, the manipulation, the fake mortgage claims, I knew there was only one way this was going to end. But before taking the final step, I decided to sit my parents down for one last conversation. I came back to the house and told them we needed to talk. I kept it calm, straightforward. I explained that I had given them a home, not handed over ownership. I told them I never intended to kick them out, but they were the ones trying to push me out of my own house. They didn't take it seriously. They laughed at the idea that I would actually go through with anything. They told me there was no way I'd evict my own parents. They acted like it was impossible, like I was bluffing. I wasn't. The next day, I had a process server deliver the official eviction notice. My parents had 30 days to leave. That's when all hell broke loose. My phone started blowing up again. Relatives, family, friends, even people I barely knew. Everyone suddenly had an opinion. My parents told them I was kicking them onto the street, that I was destroying the family over a house. The guilt tripping came in full force. Back at the house, they were furious, screaming, slamming doors, calling me heartless. My mom was sobbing, saying I was kicking out my own mother. My dad went straight to threats. He told me they had spoken to a lawyer and that they had tenant rights. I checked with my own lawyer. My parents had no lease, no rental agreement. They weren't paying rent. Legally, they weren't tenants. They were squatters. And now that I had served the eviction notice, they had no choice but to leave unless they wanted to fight it in court, which would be a losing battle for them. That night, I stayed at a friend's place again. I didn't want to deal with them. The next morning, I went back to grab some things. My key didn't work. They had changed the locks. I stood there, stunned. My own parents had locked me out of my house. I tried calling, no answer. I knocked, no response. I had no choice. I called the cops. When the officers arrived, my parents suddenly turned into victims. My mom was crying. My dad was ranting, but the officers weren't buying it. I showed them the security footage, and that was it. They arrested my parents for attempted burglary and trespassing. It wasn't just a warning this time. They were actually facing charges. The cops asked for proof of ownership. I had all the documents, the mortgage, the deed, everything. The moment the officers saw that my name was the only one on the paperwork, the conversation changed. The cops told my parents they had no right to lock me out. They ordered them to let me inside immediately. My parents tried to argue, but the law was on my side. They had no choice but to let me back in. After the officers left, my parents went into full meltdown mode. My mom collapsed onto the couch, crying like she had just lost everything. My dad started ranting about how I was being manipulated by outsiders. I ignored it and went to my room to grab some more of my things. That's when I noticed something else. My parents had moved into the master bedroom. They had taken over the largest room in the house, after telling me to leave. I left again that night. I couldn't stay there knowing they would try something else. Then came the social media smear campaign. My mom posted a long Facebook rant about how her own son had betrayed her. She wrote that I had tricked them into thinking the house was theirs, and was now throwing them out like garbage. The comments were full of sympathy, people saying I should be ashamed, that I was a terrible son, that family is more important than money. Then the threats started. Distant relatives and random family friends messaged me, saying I was heartless. One cousin sent a long text about how I was going to regret this when they were gone. Another uncle straight up told me I was dead to him. The eviction process had already started, but my lawyer warned me it wouldn't be instant. Even though my parents had no legal claim, the process could still take months if they tried to stall. They had 30 days to leave, but if they refused, I'd have to take further legal action. My siblings tried to step in. They begged me to reconsider, to just give them more time. One even suggested that I find them a smaller place and pay for it so they wouldn't be homeless. I refused. They had made their choice. They had spent the last month treating me like I didn't matter, like I was just some tenant who needed to leave. They locked me out of my own house. They tried to turn the entire family against me. There was no going back. 30 days, and they were gone. With the eviction date getting closer, I expected things to get tense. What I didn't expect was for my parents to start treating the house like a free-for-all. I went back one evening to grab some of my things. I walked into my old room and immediately noticed something was off. My gaming console? Gone. My extra laptop? Missing. Even some of my clothes and personal items were nowhere to be found. I checked the living room. A few pieces of furniture were missing too. I asked a neighbor if they'd seen anything. Turns out my parents had been selling off my belongings for extra cash. They weren't even being discreet about it. People had been coming by, picking up things they listed online. I had no idea how much they had sold already, but it was clear they were trying to squeeze every last cent out of the situation before they had to leave. And then it got even worse. Another neighbor mentioned something strange. They had seen a guy carrying a mattress into the house a few nights ago. I didn't think much of it at first, but something wasn't adding up. I checked online and found a rental listing, not just for a room, but also for some of my personal belongings. My gaming console, my extra laptop, gone. They had been selling my things through online marketplaces, and I had no idea how much they had already gotten rid of. My parents were trying to rent out a spare bedroom while they were being evicted. I confronted them, and they didn't even try to deny it. They said they needed extra income to figure out their next steps. They had already taken a deposit from someone, and were planning to let them move in within the next week. That was it. I immediately called my lawyer and filed an emergency notice to stop them from bringing in random tenants while they were actively being removed from the house. At the same time, extended family got involved. Again, they wanted to hold an intervention for me. Apparently, I was being too harsh. A few aunts and uncles tried to convince me to sit down and work things out like family. I refused. Then the threats started. I got a message from a relative warning me that if I didn't do the right thing, I'd regret it. Another one hinted that I should watch my back. That was all I needed. I went straight to the police and filed a restraining order against my parents and a few of the more vocal relatives. I wasn't taking any chances. Then the next bombshell dropped. A financial institution contacted me about some recent documents that needed verification. When I looked into it, I found out my parents had tried to forge my signature on a financial document. They were trying to take out a loan using my information. I called my bank, locked down my accounts, and reported the fraud. They didn't get away with it, but the fact that they even tried showed me they had completely lost it. Meanwhile, my brother called, acting like he had a solution. He offered to buy the house at a ridiculous lowball price, less than half of what I paid. He told me it was a compromise so that no one had to lose. I hung up. There was nothing to discuss. At this point, I couldn't stay there anymore. Even though I legally owned the house, I moved out temporarily while the legal process played out. Court day came. My parents actually tried to claim I had gifted them the house. They argued that my intent was for them to own it, and that I was now changing the terms unfairly. The judge didn't even entertain it. The house was in my name, the mortgage was in my name, and there was no legal proof that I had ever transferred ownership to them. Their claim was completely denied. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later I got a call. More drama. My parents were still refusing to leave. The official eviction was starting, and they were ignoring it like it wasn't real. I had no choice. I hired a moving company and scheduled a day to have all their things packed up and taken out. The day of the move, they went into full meltdown mode. Screaming, crying, calling me a traitor, a disgrace. Every insult they could think of. My dad started threatening to sue. My mom kept crying about how she was being made homeless by her own son. They refused to touch any of their stuff. The movers had to handle everything while my parents sat in the living room, acting like they had no idea how it had come to this. After one final screaming match, they left. No goodbyes, no last words. They just walked out, furious and humiliated. Even now, they refuse to speak to me. And honestly, that might be for the best. The moment my parents walked out of the house, I wasted no time. I changed the locks that same day. There was no telling what they might try next, and I wasn't about to find out. The eviction was final, but I knew they weren't going to accept it quietly. Once the locks were taken care of, I did a full walkthrough of the house, and that's when I saw what they had done. They had trashed the place. There were holes in the walls, deep scratches on the hardwood floors. The kitchen cabinets had been yanked so hard, some doors were hanging off the hinges. The guest bathroom had water damage. Someone had left the faucet running just enough for it to overflow at some point. It looked intentional. Worst of all, they had dumped garbage in random spots. Old food stuffed in drawers, bags of trash hidden in corners. There was even a faint smell of something rotting in one of the closets. I had to deep clean everything. I documented all of it, took pictures, and forwarded everything to my lawyer. The cost of repairs was going to be expensive, but legally, my parents were already gone. There was no getting that money back from them. I had to eat the cost. Meanwhile, they had already moved in with a relative, and of course they were telling everyone that I had made them homeless. The family group chats exploded again. More messages, more guilt tripping. A few relatives tried to pressure me into letting them stay just a little longer while they figured things out. I ignored every single one. Even with all of that, there was a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I could actually breathe in my own home without feeling like I was an outsider. The stress wasn't completely gone, but at least now I wasn't constantly on edge wondering what they were going to pull next. Friends reassured me. I had done the right thing. Even people online had my back. Every time I second-guessed myself, I remembered they did this to themselves. Then came the final guilt trip. One night, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew who it was from the second I opened it. It was my mom. The entire letter was a long-winded attempt to make me feel bad. She wrote about how they had never expected their own child to abandon them, how they had given everything for me, and how they were now living in terrible conditions because of what I had done. The last part of the letter was the real kicker. She asked for money. After everything, after the months of manipulation, after them trying to steal my house, after the threats, the lies, the restraining order, they had the nerve to ask me for financial help. I didn't even finish reading it. I tossed it straight into the trash. The extended family was still angry. Some of them stopped talking to me completely. Others would send random passive-aggressive messages. I let them go. If they wanted to believe my parents' version of the story, that was on them. Things changed with my siblings too. One of them, who had originally tried to stay neutral, finally admitted that they understood why I had to do what I did. We weren't suddenly best friends, but at least there was no more tension. My other sibling, fully no contact. They had taken my parents' side from the start, and after the eviction, they completely cut me off. No calls, no messages, nothing. I started going to therapy to process everything. It helped. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around trying to keep my parents happy. The more I talked about it, the clearer it became. This was never about a house. It was about control. Months passed. My parents still told their version of events online. I knew they were playing the victims, because every now and then someone would send me screenshots of their posts. They painted themselves as two helpless, innocent people who had been betrayed by their greedy, heartless son. I didn't engage. I had moved on. And for the first time in a long time, I finally had peace. I thought the worst was over. I thought my parents moving out meant I could finally move on. I was wrong. One night, I pulled into my driveway and immediately noticed something was off. The garage door had been spray painted. In huge red letters, the words "TF" and "Traitor" were plastered across it. I checked the front door, more spray paint. My security cameras had caught everything. Two people wearing hoodies, but I knew exactly who they were. My parents. I called the police and filed a report. I handed over the footage, and they told me they'd investigate. A few days later, an officer followed up, confirming my parents could be charged with property damage and trespassing. I had the option to press charges, and after everything they'd done, I didn't hesitate. Whether or not anything would come of it, I wasn't sure, but at least now it was officially documented. A few hours later, my brother called, furious, not at our parents for vandalizing my home, but at me for involving the cops. He went on about how I was making things worse, that I needed to just let it go. I hung up. There was nothing to discuss. Then came the next round of Facebook rants. My mom posted a long, dramatic status about how she was being harassed by her own son. She claimed she was living in fear and that I was trying to destroy them for no reason. The post got hundreds of comments, full of sympathy from family friends, distant relatives, and random people who had no idea what was really happening. The messages started pouring in, more people telling me I was cruel, that I should be ashamed. Someone even messaged me anonymously, warning me to fix this before something bad happens. I called my lawyer. He told me to start considering a restraining order. Then I got served with legal papers. My parents were suing me for ownership of the house. At least that's what they wanted me to think. The documents had no court stamp, no official case number, just a pile of nonsense they probably printed off the internet to scare me into thinking they had a case. My lawyer took one look and called it out immediately. No court stamps, no official case number, just a pile of nonsense meant to scare me into thinking they had a case. I called their bluff. I didn't respond. Nothing ever came from it. Another desperate move that led nowhere. Then an uncle reached out, claiming he wanted to fix things. He offered to set up a family meeting so we could all talk it out. I refused. There was nothing to fix. At that point, I thought I had handled everything. But then I got a letter from the county about overdue property taxes. Apparently, my parents had never paid the property taxes they had agreed to cover. They just let them pile up, expecting me to deal with it eventually. I paid the balance immediately, then had them officially removed from anything financial related to the house. No more surprises. Then, the final ridiculous demand. My parents started telling people that I owed them money for all the improvements they made to the house. Except, there were no improvements. If anything, they had damaged the house before leaving. Yet, they were now trying to guilt me into paying them for work. They never did. At that point, even my brother started pulling away. No more texts, no more calls. I think he finally realized they had gone too far. I posted another update online, and it exploded again. Thousands of comments, all supporting me, telling me I needed to cut them off completely. Some people even shared similar stories of entitled family members trying to pull the same thing. At this point, I was done. No more chances. No more conversations. My parents weren't just trying to take my house, they wanted to destroy my life while doing it. After my parents failed to take my house, trashed it on the way out, and tried to sue me with fake documents, they moved on to their next target, my uncle. This was the same uncle who had tried to hold a family meeting to make me fix things. He had taken my parents' side in the beginning, fully believing their sob story about how I had betrayed them. He told them they could stay with him temporarily while they got back on their feet. It didn't take long for history to repeat itself. At first, things seemed fine. My parents were grateful, acting like they had learned their lesson. But within a few months they started pulling the same entitled behavior they had with me. They refused to contribute to household expenses. They ignored rules. They complained about everything, demanding things be done their way. Then came the control issues. They started treating my uncle's house like it was theirs. They told him how to decorate. They started dictating who could visit. They even made demands about what food should be bought because they didn't like what was in the fridge. Worst of all, they stopped paying rent. Even though my uncle had originally let them stay for free, he eventually asked them to pitch in something. Instead, they kept dodging it, making excuses, acting like they shouldn't have to pay because they were family. Sound familiar? My uncle finally realized what was happening. He reached out to me, and this time, he wasn't defending them anymore. He admitted that he had completely underestimated the situation. He thought they were just struggling, and that I had been too harsh. But now he was dealing with the exact same nightmare, and he wanted them gone. At first he tried to be patient. He even defended them, saying they were just adjusting to their new situation. But after a few months of them dodging bills, taking over common spaces, and refusing to contribute, he finally saw what I had warned him about. He gave them notice to leave, but just like with me, they refused. So my uncle did exactly what I had done. He formally evicted them. When they realized they had nowhere else to go, they showed up at my house. I came home one evening and found them waiting on my front porch. They told me they had nowhere else to go. They said they had learned their lesson. They begged me to just let them stay for a little while. I shut it down immediately. I told them they had burned their bridges, that I had given them every chance and they had thrown it away, that they had done this to themselves. Then my mom broke down. She threw herself onto the lawn, sobbing so loudly that neighbors started looking outside. She kept wailing about how I was abandoning my own mother and how I was turning my back on family. My dad just stood there, glaring at me, arms crossed, waiting to see if I would cave. I didn't. A neighbor must have called the cops because a few minutes later, a police car pulled up. The officers asked what was going on, and I told them straight, I owned the house, my parents weren't welcome here, and I wanted them gone. The police escorted them off my property. That was the last time I saw them. The next day, they blocked me on everything. They told extended family I was dead to them. And of course the smear campaign continued. They trashed my name to anyone who would listen. In the local community, at family gatherings, everywhere. They told people I had abandoned them when they needed me most, that I had stolen their house, that I had destroyed my own family over money. Random people started messaging me online, calling me heartless. I even got a few anonymous threats, telling me I would regret this. My brother refused to see reason. He told me I was making a mistake, that I should just let them stay. At first I thought he truly believed them, but after a while, I realized he just didn't want to be the bad guys in the family drama. It was easier for him to blame me than admit our parents were in the wrong. He told me I should have just let them stay. He completely ignored everything they had done. I started therapy around this time. I had spent so much energy dealing with them that I hadn't processed just how much damage they had caused. I had been so focused on defending myself, on stopping them from ruining my life, that I never realized how exhausted I was from all of it. Therapy helped. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy for cutting them off, that I wasn't being cruel, I was protecting myself. For the first time in years, I was finally living in my own house, without stress. I could actually enjoy my space, make plans for the future, and not constantly be worried about what insane thing my parents were going to pull next. Reddit's final advice? Make sure they can never come after me or my assets again. I've already started working on that. I knew my parents wouldn't give up easily, but I never expected them to try breaking into my house in the middle of the night. Ever since the last incident where they showed up crying on my lawn, I had beefed up my home security, new locks, reinforced doors, motion-activated floodlights, and security cameras covering every angle of the house. It was worth every penny. A few nights ago, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a notification from my home security app, motion detected, front door. I opened the live feed, and there they were. My parents, both dressed in dark clothing. My dad had a crowbar in hand, while my mom kept looking around nervously. They weren't even trying to be subtle. My dad tried to jam something into the lock, shaking the handle aggressively while my mom stood behind him, whispering something. I didn't even hesitate. I called the cops immediately. As I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, my dad moved to the side door and tried the same thing. My mom pulled out her phone, probably checking if the security cameras were visible, but at that point, it didn't matter. The footage was crystal clear. Less than 5 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed down the street. The moment my parents saw the patrol cars pull up, they tried to run, too late. The officers caught them right in my driveway. When I opened the door, my mom immediately started crying, playing the victim. My dad, on the other hand, tried to act like this was all a misunderstanding. They claimed they had just left something inside and were trying to retrieve it, that it wasn't breaking in because it was their house too. The officers didn't buy it. I showed them the security footage, proving that they had no reason to be there. It didn't matter what excuse they tried, they were trespassing, and for the first time, I pressed charges. Enough was enough. By the next morning, all hell broke loose. My brother called, furious, not at our parents for trying to break into my house, but at me for calling the cops. He ranted about how I was taking things too far and how I should have just let them get whatever they were looking for. I told him they weren't looking for anything, they were trying to force their way back in. He didn't care. He told me I was a backstabber and that I had officially ruined the family. Then, the Facebook sob story began. My parents posted another dramatic rant, saying they were now homeless because of me. They wrote about how they had no money, no support, and nowhere to go, painting me as the villain who had abandoned his own parents. At first, the sympathy poured in. More distant relatives, family friends, and random people started attacking me online. More messages flooded my inbox, calling me cruel and heartless. But this time, it backfired. A few people actually started calling them out. Some of my parents' old friends, people who knew them well, began questioning their story. One person straight up asked why they were trespassing at 2 a.m. if they were just trying to retrieve something. Others mentioned how they had already been evicted from multiple places and were known for playing the victim. The more my parents doubled down, the worse they looked. With nowhere left to go, my parents ended up in a cheap motel, and guess what? They tried to make it my problem. They demanded I pay for their stay, claiming I owed them since I had kicked them out. They said I was morally responsible for their situation, and that family takes care of each other. I blocked them. No more conversations, no more messages. Done. A few days later, I heard from a mutual friend that my parents were threatening to expose me. Their plan: they were going to spread false rumors to ruin my reputation. They claimed they had proof that I had stolen money from them, that I had been abusive, and that I had manipulated the legal system to take their home. I didn't even react. I had real proof, legal documents, security footage, eviction records, everything. I wasn't worried. And then, Reddit did its thing. A few internet sleuths found my parents' public Facebook posts and started connecting the dots. They exposed their lies, pointing out contradictions in their own stories. Screenshots started circulating, showing just how manipulative they were. Their little smear campaign, dead on arrival. At this point, I don't care what they say anymore. They tried to steal my house. They vandalized my property. They forged financial documents in my name. They tried to break in. And now, they are completely out of my life. After everything, I sat down with my lawyer and made one final move. I started the legal process to disinherit them completely. No access to my assets. No way to claim anything in the future. Nothing. If they ever try to come back years from now, they get nothing. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I finally feel free. After everything, evictions, fake lawsuits, vandalism, break-in attempts, it was time to shut the door on this nightmare for good. I sat down with my lawyer and took every step necessary to make sure my parents could never try to come after my assets again. They were legally disinherited from anything tied to me. Their names were completely removed from any financial records. A no-contact legal notice was drawn up to block any future claims. There would be no loophole, no second chance, no way for them to ever claim anything from me again. If they ever tried to contest it, they would lose. I blocked them on everything. Phone numbers? Blocked. Emails? Blocked. Social media? Gone. They had already cut me off once, claiming I was dead to them, so I just made it official. There was no reason to ever speak to them again. My brother refused to speak to me. Not once did he acknowledge everything our parents had done. To him, it didn't matter that they had tried to steal my house, break in and manipulate everyone around them. He still saw me as the villain. That part wasn't surprising. What did surprise me was how divided the rest of the family became. Some relatives finally saw the truth. They had believed my parents at first, but once the lies started piling up, it became impossible to ignore. Others, they doubled down. To them, I was the ungrateful son who had betrayed his parents. At family gatherings, My name wasn't mentioned. Some people refused to talk to me. Others still sent passive-aggressive messages, hoping I would come to my senses. I didn't respond. For the first time in years, my home was mine. No fights, no drama, no random strangers moving in because my parents thought they could rent out rooms in a house they didn't own. Just peace. I finally started focusing on my career, and funny enough, I started excelling, without the stress of dealing with my parents constantly draining my energy. I actually had time to invest in myself. A few months later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew exactly who it was from. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. It was long, dramatic, and filled with one last desperate attempt at guilt-tripping me. She wrote about how they forgave me. Yes, forgave me. After everything they had done, stealing, lying, manipulating, and literally breaking into my house, they were acting like I was the one who had wronged them. They said they still loved me and hoped I would find my way back to family. I didn't even finish reading it. I threw it straight into the trash. That was the moment I realized. I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no second thoughts. For so long I had carried this weight, constantly questioning if I was doing the right thing. But standing there, looking at that letter in the trash, I knew I had made the right choice. A few months later I heard from a distant cousin that my parents had moved out of state. They had finally given up. They couldn't keep up their smear campaign when nobody believed them anymore. With everything finally behind me, I started looking into buying a new house. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted something that wasn't tied to all the chaos and drama they had caused. A real fresh start. When I posted my last update, it exploded. Thousands of upvotes. Thousands of comments. People telling me they had been through the same thing. People telling me I was justified all along. At the end of the day, family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And my parents never respected me. Now, they are out of my life for good. And I have never felt more free.